Hello and welcome to Hubler Product Talks. Thanks for joining. We're 2 months in the new year. And as you know, Product Talks is our exclusive series for our product managers where we talk to the brightest minds in the world of product. So as you know, this is a no-fluff session, especially when I'm around, but we discuss the challenges every day that a PM faces, learn from the veterans of how you could solve them, and understand where the product in the grand scheme of things of your organization lies and how you can double your, last mile and double down on your wins. So today, without further ado, we have Shravan Tickoo, Group Product Manager at the EdTech firm called Bhanzu. He's an angel investor and an ex-principal product manager at Byju's. So before we bring Shravan online to get to talk, I just want to give you a little bit of background about this interesting personality. Outside management, Shravan prides himself as an educator on YouTube and helps more than 300 folks secure a job in product management. Furthermore, he's trained more than 10,000 product management aspirants. And his style, I got to tell you about his style, is to include humor and fun in all his sessions, where all he talks about is product thinking and backs to the focus on the fundamentals of PMing. And last but not least, I highly recommend checking out the Swag Walla PM on YouTube, where you can get to see a little bit of what Shravan does. Welcome, Shravan, to the Product Talk series. How are you doing today, sir?
I am doing absolutely okay. And thank you very much, Easy. It's lovely to be here. And especially on a Friday night where most people kind of have fun. So it's lovely to see so many people looking for understanding product management and the basics of it. So excited. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think the people that joined have something more in mind, which is to get the bag and be more efficient in product management. So thank you again for joining us. So today we'll be talking about the importance of documentation and how it can help PMs leverage it effectively to stay sane when working cross-functionally through multiple stakeholders. So are you ready for the questions?
Absolutely. Please.
All right, let's fire away. Again, to the people that just joined, welcome back to the Product Talks of Hubler. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them down on chat, and we'll see if we have time and we can address them. So question number one, Shravan, why is documentation important for PMs? And can you explain the role of documentation in product management?
Awesome. So I think if you look very fundamentally, the question is not about why documentation is important. The question is why writing is important. So why writing is a very fundamental skills for PMs to govern. So I'll give you a very interesting example. So today, if I tell you, Easy, can you tell me what kind of life you have lived in the last 5 years and write a document for it? You probably would write 10,000 words. And that becomes so hard to read.
Yeah.
Right? But if I just repose the question to you and say, can you tell me your entire story in 100 words? Then you automatically filter out those things which are irrelevant. Right. And you move towards the more relevant and prioritized things. So writing fundamentally develops a very strong sense of prioritization in a product manager. That's one. The second thing that aspires towards that why a PRD is important or why documentation is whatever document you are writing is important is that it serves as a single source of truth. So if you write a document and it's percolated across your organization, everybody knows what you're working on, what are the edge cases, what are you thinking about, what are the metrics that you want to chase. So it brings a parity across the organization that everybody starts thinking that this is something that I want to move, or this is the kind of product that I want to build. And it is the single source of truth, nothing taken away in a verbatim manner. The third thing that is also very essential is that while you start writing, you also start collating a list of edge cases. Most consumer experiences are a bunch of edge cases. Like if you click on a button, what should happen? If you want to move from one place to another, what should happen? If you start speaking about it, you might end up missing tons of edge cases, which makes the product buggy as hell. But if you start writing it down, you will start thinking about, okay, if the API fails, what should happen? If the API doesn't fail, what should happen? So it gives you a 3-layered process. And that is why documentation serves as a very essential piece for a product manager across the organization. You're writing any document, it doesn't matter. But what it essentially has to boil down to, it should serve as a single source of truth. It should give you complete understanding of the user journey. And third thing, it should deepen your sense of prioritization from a business and a user point of view. So that's why it's important. Yeah.
Excellent answer. So I think you kind of covered the second question that I have. But just to reiterate what you said, you're basically saying that let's get everybody on the same page. Documentation first, single point of truth. And then after that, you have your edge cases, which are clearly defined. Everybody knows and it's clearly detailed, etc. And then you move from there and you finally have a refined product that you can bring to the market. So next question. What are some key documents a product leader should create for a hiccup-free product development?
So I think let's start from understanding that how the product life cycle works.
Okay.
Initially, it is the discovery phase where you talk to the consumer a lot. You don't have a product at that point. You try to understand what's the pain point of your consumer. Then automatically you move towards what's the feedback of the consumer on the current product. Are they happy? Are they not really happy? So at that stage, when you're collecting feedback, the first thing that you should write is something like a concept doc, that how I am going to tackle this problem in the solution space. And that concept doc is not a coverage of edge cases or feature flows. It's just a high level document that basically this is the core consumer problem that there is, and I want to solve this. And you circulate it across the organization so that design understands what kind of design they have to make, engineering understands what kind of scale they have to build, and they all develop a sense of what kind of product that you want to build. Once you have some sense of discovery and the fundamental problem that you want to solve, and you move to the solutioning phase, then the next important document that you effectively have to look at is, can I write a very good product spec or a PRD, a product requirement document? Right now, in the product requirement document, there are a bunch of things that we'll cover. I think there are more questions that you have to ask on those particular topics. But yeah, so the PRD effectively is a document which tells you in a deeper manner that what kind of experiences will happen in a product. I'll give you an example. For example, you are a payments gateway.
All right.
And you essentially write a PRD. In the PRD, in the concept doc, you will not write that whether the success rate of the payment gateway should define what payment gateway is to be shown to the user. The concept doc talks about that we should have very high success rates or 98% success rates. But whereas in the PRD, you would mention this case that while a payment gateway fails, you automatically resort it and bring the better payment gateway for the consumer. So it's a detailed document where you write feature flows. And then moving towards the end of it, you probably would want to try to write some kind of a metric document, that how do I measure the success of this product that I'm currently building. And there are some horizontal documents also, which is like a design document, that how design is happening, how the design sprints work. But in the context of the user journey, you start with the concept doc, you write a PRD with cross-functionally, then you move towards a metric doc, and that is where the life cycle works, and then you try to measure the success of the product. Yeah.
Excellent. So let me ask you a question just out of left field. What is the first, let's just say the PRDs, the whole thing. What is the first block or the first section that Shravan would start?
I think it is the problem statement. How do you define the problem statement? How do you fundamentally understand that this is the experience that is not there in the market, but this is a much needed experience, right? I'll give you an example of EdTech, how EdTech basically essentially became a very successful model. So earlier, maybe go 15 years back, the way education used to happen was that if there is a great teacher, you actually have to go to his place in an offline setup to learn, right?
Correct.
So this basically disrupted, or this was not the right kind of access that people would want in the world. Because if you are a student who's in a tier 3 city, wants to learn from a teacher in Bangalore, there is no option but to go to Bangalore, and it's damn expensive. So the first problem at tech, people thought, anybody who built an education at tech, is that the problem is access. And that is where they figured out that internet is a way to solve access.
Yes.
And once they built access, then they built economies of scale. That at high scale, we would be able to charge less. So they solved the second problem also, that it is expensive, they made it cheap. So everything starts from the first thing, that do you have the right problem? And the best way to do it is talk to your consumer, who is your target persona, try to understand how they are doing a particular activity or an action they are doing, and then build enough feedback that you can define that problem statement in like 10 words or 15 words. So this is what I want to solve. Yeah.
That's an amazing answer. So basically you're saying, what is the purpose, right? Yeah. What are we trying to solve? And rather than coming at it from a perspective of, let me write something about the product, you're actually thinking about what are you trying to solve, and then it trickles down from there. So excellent answer over there. I think you actually mentioned how you write an effective PRD. So let me just take one question from chat. So Rishi Jha just posted, many people feel that a great wireframe replaced the need of a PRD. So what's your take on this? Wireframe versus PRD?
For sure. So like Rishi is partly right. I'll tell you why. Most of the flows that you effectively see in a B2C kind of a product, right? They can be explained through the UI or UX only, but you have to be very detailed about it, right? But the problem is, in sometimes there are edge cases that you cannot mention in a wireframe, right? Plus, the essence of a PRD is not just the feature flows. The essence of the PRD is to set the context in the organization that this is the vision of the product that I want to build. This is the problem statement. This is the design philosophy that I'm putting across. Then comes the feature flows, which is generally replaced by a wireframe if you want to replace it across. So feature flows or wireframes are like one section of a PRD, right? Then wireframes don't dictate the metrics that you want to track. It's the PRD which will kind of develop the common sense of metrics that go across the organization. Everybody wants to understand what are the key core metrics through which I want to build a particular great product. So PRD probably is a combination of like 5-6 major components, but it starts with setting up the vision. But a wireframe might not be able to do that. But if while in the implementation stage, yes, there might be a possibility that a wireframe might replace a PRD because you're kind of implementing the product and everybody has understood the essence of the product. Yeah. So answered it that.
Perfect. All right, Rishi, I hope that answers your question. Keep them coming, chat. If you got more questions, we got Shravan with us today. So another thing, in terms of, let's say, when you're writing your PRD, right, there is a bunch of documents and you might be using a couple of dashboards. You still need some type of, to gauge the metrics. You need some live previews. So what are some things that you would use to make sure that you communicate like vision and drive in terms of decision making across the organization? Is it just the document, everybody's there on a Google Drive, or do you have a separate dashboard that everybody knows? Because the PRD is the single source of truth, but that needs to be displayed in different ways for people to realize that, right? So what's your take on that?
I think this is more of a function of how do you communicate the PRD as a functional documentation across the org.
Okay.
Right? And how do you break it across? So one of the interesting things that I essentially do in my PRDs is that I write basically the consensus structure of the organization. So what I mean by that is that you use any tool, you put it across on any Google Drive or Notion or anywhere or make it public or wherever, but you kind of write that what is the sales consensus on this problem? What is the ops consensus on this problem? Like I'll give you one more example around it. So for example, you are selling courses,
right?
And at a particular price point, right? Sure. And for example, for $1,000, you are selling a course, and now this month you want to do something like $1 million in revenue. So for sales, it will be 1 million divided by 1,000, maybe 1,000 odd courses they want to sell, and they will look at the average ticket size, and their metrics will trickle down in a certain way, and they would say that okay, this is possible or this is not possible. But on the contrary, for ops, that would not matter. For ops, what would matter is whether I can give a very good experience to the student in class. Do I have enough teachers? Is there enough supply?
Correct.
Right? So once people start from the top vision document and kind of build consensus in the PRD, the vision automatically disseminates to different functions. This is the core thing that I want to drive. But for me, these are the few things for my function to work efficiently. And that is the consensus that a PRD would drive. So I essentially do that. Not a lot of PMs do that, but I feel at a roadmap level, this is really, really important that you have consensus of all the people in the company before you kind of start bombarding yourself in building the product.
Perfect. So to people that are actually doing it naturally without knowing that you're doing it, you're on the right track, right? So there is a broad vision, and then from there you drive down a consensus being the key word. That's an impressive take on how you write the PRD, Shravan. So next question, you want to take a break?
Yeah. We can take a break for like 30 seconds. Yeah.
All right.
Yes. All right.
So I was just kidding, by the way. But anyways, this is awesome. Can you give an example of time when proper documentation helped resolve a product issue or a problem?
I think I have a very recent example. So what we were doing is we were doing payment integrations across geographies for a particular product that I was consulting for. So what necessarily happened was that while we developed the product, right, there was some gap in the PRD and the actual implementation, which was basically the payments were not happening correctly, the success rates were slightly poor and stuff like that, right? So instead of a lot of times when you don't have a great documentation, what this scenario will result into is unnecessarily debugging. That this might be the problem, that might be the problem, or the API failure is a problem, or something else is a problem, which takes a lot of dev bandwidth. So assume that you're working on a project for 15 days and 2 days go in debugging, specifically figuring it out. 2 days take care of bad consumer experience also, because you have not been able to debug the experience. So there is payment failures that actually happened, right? The great part was that just after we realized that the payment was not happening perfectly, or the success rates of the PG were poor, right? We eventually went back to the PRD. We eventually went back to the architecture review board document, and we actually saw that there was an edge case that we missed.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the beauty of it, that it took us hardly 45 to 60 minutes to identify that there is a problem in the logic through which the way we are showing payment gateways, and we fixed it in 3 hours. And I'll give you one more interesting fact. The product that I'm talking about does somewhere around $700,000 a day. So if I just fix the problem for 10% of consumers, I effectively saved $70,000 a day.
Absolutely.
That's how beautiful great documentation is.
I mean, you're just very humble about telling it, but that's a huge impact, right? If you think about time is money, and you take one step back and one step forward and 2 steps back if you don't have a good documentation. So, of course, in terms of using documentation to track and measure product performance, basically you already explained that by saying having consensus, individual APIs. So, how do you actually, once your PRD is ready, right? You have multiple consumers. Everybody has their own opinions, and especially when you're dealing with something like 700,000 a day or even $1 million a day, you're going to get a lot of feedback, right? So how do you funnel that feedback into the cycle of it going back to the product resource document and then fixing it?
I think feedback is a consistent process for sure. And what is really, really important is that you have to understand that a product is never perfect. So essentially in documentations, there is a concept that was promoted by one of the very famous product leaders, that you essentially try to build some kind of a change log. What I mean by a change log is that you essentially had some hypothesis which you wanted to test across, and you built a feature on top of it, and you released it to your consumers, right? And your consumers gave you feedback. And if the feedback corroborates with your hypothesis, then there is no change.
Right.
But if it doesn't, then there is a change log that actually happens in the PRD, and the thesis of the product slightly changes.
Yes.
So the one way to effectively look at it is that a PRD, I don't like documentations to be called PRDs. They are actually product requirement drafts, not documents. They're always drafts, which essentially keep on taking feedback to a point where you essentially define that my metric is now hitting product market fit, or 75% of all my consumers are saying that you have a great product, you have a great NPS, right? So the feedback comes from multiple directions. It can be design, it can be UX, it can be your sales people, but the space that you have to keep it in your document is that change log. How do I funnel this feedback? Prioritize it in a certain way using any framework. It can be impact versus satisfaction. It can be a lot of other frameworks are there. How do I funnel that feedback and put it back in the documentation and change the thesis of the documentation and again and again? So at least that concept of a change log is really important for all product managers to kind of understand.
All right. I'm going to put you on the spot a little here. Let's focus on that. I like that answer. But let's say, a person A is building a PRD, or in your case, a draft, right? So that's a good way of thinking about that. Hey, this is bound to change, right? I'm creating something, I'm releasing it to the world, and I'm going to take what's, coming back, and then I'm going to change the product. But when you're creating your hypothesis, you might be a little biased, right? Now, there might be experience that adds to the bias. There might be a whole bunch of, elements that can contribute to that. So let's say when you do deal with this type of feedback, and we're not talking about just 5 people calling you up and saying, hey, Shravan, I really like this, but I want this button to be this color. If you're talking about in the millions, the hundreds of thousands, how would you know what to prioritize, and how would you know when to let go of that bias? Is it something that you gain through experience, or do you have to go into Zen mode and be like, okay, I'm gonna tear everything apart and build it back together?
I think it's a very interesting question, and I'll tell you how I would answer that. So whenever you build a hypothesis, there is no value of a hypothesis without a way to measure that hypothesis. So a hypothesis has absolutely no value if you don't know how to measure the success of that hypothesis, whether it's good or bad, right? So you build certain kind of matrices or certain kind, and those matrices are driven by certain actions the user should take according to your hypothesis. That this is the action. Like for Hubler, if you're building a no-code platform, I would say that my user should come in and click on the no-code platform, do a drag and drop, and should be able to create an app. So these are some of the fundamental actions that the user should take, right? Now, what you have to essentially understand is that if you very correctly define those actions, any feedback that is coming around to those actions drives perfect engagement. That is the true engagement that you would ideally want to drive. So once you have tied those metrics very closely and those engagement actions very closely, then whatever feedback is around those actions, you prioritize that, because those are the intended actions that you want to drive a particular company metric, to drive a company success, or whatever it is. So the thesis that I typically say is that build a hypothesis, build an intended set of actions, build a metric, right? Get feedback, right? Whatever that feedback is, try to see how does it fit in those cohort of that particular action metric that is there. Do some kind of cohort analysis that whether people are actually doing that action or not, which you thought you wanted to do at the first place. So if people are not doing that action, you have to change your hypothesis. Right. If people are doing that action, that means your hypothesis is correct, and you don't have a bias in your feedback.
Interesting. Yeah. I like that answer. So again, chat, if you do have any questions, we're almost nearing the end of our session. I got a couple of questions that I need to knock off with Shravan. So let's see. I have one right now. Perfect timing. So Sushil Raphael says, how much depth should the product requirement draft hold? And when should we begin drafting one? So when the hypothesis, which is a solution, or after a solid feedback from prototyping?
Got it. So I think from a product requirement draft, I would say it has to be detailed enough for you to cover 90% of the positive edge cases, at least positive edge cases. I'm not talking about the negative edge cases, that something random happens on the platform. So if the depth of the draft has to be tied to the feature flows that you want to develop, because there is another guy who has to code that. And it is a very logical abstract, unlike writing, which might be a non-abstract kind of a thing. So you have to be very detailed in terms of the feature flows that you want to drive. That is one. Second, when should we begin a drafting one? When a hypothesis, a solution is there, or solid feedback from prototyping? I think it really depends. If you get very solid feedback in the very early that there is a very, very strong need, then also you can build a very, very profound product. But your feedback should be very solid. Very, very solid. If you don't know what kind of solution I want to build and I want to test out solutions, then you start writing the draft after doing a bit of prototyping and building some kind of solution structures around it and see which solution is something that the users actually want to use. So it really depends on how clear. So I'll give you a very simple example. For example, in the logistics industry, there is a subject matter expert who has 20 years of experience, right? And if he wants to build a product, he understands the industry in and out. So they can actually start writing the PRD from that particular moment without even getting that much amount of feedback, because that the person is there. That is the Apple philosophy. They believe they understand their product so well that they don't do user testing at a massive scale. So, then the other way around. The other way around is that if you don't know which solution will work, you understand the problem well, then you start coming up with solutions and see that which solution has most affinity, and the solution which has the most affinity, you build a hypothesis around it, and then you start writing the draft. So it really depends on what kind of person you are and what kind of stage the company is in. Yeah.
Excellent answer. So just a general questions for you, Shravan, just to understand your philosophy. First of all, we already understand that you have a huge amount of weight on your shoulders, right? Because basically you're releasing product to the world. You're defining it. You're basically playing God when it comes to product, and defining the draft, and everybody else that's a PM that's joining us, or everybody else. So they have the same type of responsibilities. So how far out do you plan in detail? Is it a month in advance, a quarter? I'm talking about the PRD draft one, right? So not the entire draft. Of course, it can be accumulated, but yeah.
So I think it is also very dependent on what kind of impact do you want to drive. So for example, if I'm chasing operational efficiency, which is something like I want to improve my ops cost in a certain way or reduce the ops cost in a certain way, then the draft has to be defined in such a way that it has to happen in 1 month or 2 months, because the processes can change. Wherever there is manual human interaction, the processes are bound to change. So the product is bound to change, right? But whereas if you're building something like, I want to build the best watch time or creator-led platform, something like that, right? There, the product cycle is a lot longer. It can be 1 year also. Like, for example, in my current company, the kind of in-class experience we want to build for students, that how do they see the entire thing in the class? How do they get taught in the class? We have written a PRD, which is essentially takes care of the next 12 months. That these are the set of features that I would want to develop, right? But on the contrary, if I'm driving operational excellence, right, then I essentially have to deliver features at a breakneck speed. Right. And I want to employ and give them tools so that they can perform better in their daily actions. So the PRD then there is written in such a way that you don't put a lot of effort, but you figure out a fix and do it for 30 days, 45 days, and essentially keep on changing the fix to a point when it becomes a stable system. Yeah.
Perfect. So how is Shravan when it comes to the dungeon? So let's say your product review meetings. Do you go with the baseball bat? Do you go in cool, or how do those work?
So I think in most of the meetings, what I love generally in product meetings is that you get a lot of perspective. So I tend to hear a lot of things, which might seem very counterintuitive because I've been speaking for the last 25 minutes, but generally I listen a lot. So, and wherever I feel there is a sense, because I'll tell you one very interesting philosophical thing that I believe. For a product manager, most of the problems that you're solving are generally very abstract problems. There are a lot of variables, right? So if you start building products by the way you think about the product, it is 99% bound to fail, because you have your own biases, right? So you need more and more feedback, more and more perspectives, that maybe I'm not thinking of this, maybe I'm not thinking of that, maybe I'm not thinking of some other variable. So in generally product reviews, I talk more objectively about what we have gained in terms of the product engagement that you want to do, and I listen a lot. So that what is the feedback that I'm getting, so that how do I improve the product? Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So last thing, do you want to drop some gold on what is your primary tool for task management and a little bug tracking? You want to drop some names for us?
Yeah, I think it's the global name is Jira, but we also use Jira. That is there. I don't necessarily like the UI that much, but it has its own merits. I'll be very candid about it. So Jira is a tool that then for documentation, we either use Notion or Confluence. Confluence is also a very good tool for essential documentation. And then for generally about product road mapping, sometimes we use Trello, sometimes we have used some other kind of Asana we have used for road mapping, and few other tools that we have used. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So Jira to Jenkins and then Confluence, etc. So thank you so much, Shravan, for joining us today. I have one last question. So Abhilash Ruhela said that I've been a business analyst until last year and got promoted to associate product manager recently. Congratulations, Abhilash. Because of my analyst experience, I end up writing a lot of scenarios which cover all the edge scenarios, but end up becoming exhaustive, which dev team don't read completely or properly. How to handle this?
Okay. So I think this is fundamentally a culture of ownership. So this is not a documentation problem. It's a problem of how you define ownership in all of the teams across your company. So what you have to essentially do as a product manager, you have to be the voice of all of the teams that you work with. So how do you start working with it is give them context, as much context as you can. Tell them that what it will change for the company, for the product, for the end user, and what kind of impact it will make. So I'll give you one more very simple example. Let's assume you come up with a feature and you do some kind of an estimate around it. And because you're good at data analysis, you've written in the question, and you say that the business top line will grow by $2 million. And you tell this to the developer who is developing this across, right? And so that your feature is going to drive this much value, right? 99% scenarios, the developer will be super happy, and he'll be writing very good, very efficient code, because it reflects on his performance also, that he's a great developer, he built a very amazing. So I think context setting is essentially very important, and that's why storytelling is really, really important as a product manager. How do you sell the right story of the vision, and how do you sell the right story of driving the right metrics for across teams in their own certain way, and make them understand that they are important, and while their work is important for the consumer.
That's an awesome, again, Abhilash, congratulations. And that's an interesting question. So just to reiterate what Shravan was saying, take ownership when it comes to those situations. You can be assertive. And if you were to just analyze, how you can tell the story, you'll be right at it. Again, congratulations. So last and final question, Shravan. They're not letting you go. They want to just keep on giving you questions. So Mayank Jain says, how much time should a PM spend in building PRDs? And a high growth startup might be experimenting, building, failing quickly. So wouldn't the PRDs turn obsolete in no time?
That's why I said it's a draft and with a change log.
Absolutely. So it just works in reverse. We answered that question. So it will turn obsolete as soon as there is any type of bias. You're not having your feedback cycle. So that's why the organization will automatically fail quickly. So yes, it starts with the PRD. I mean, there's one element, of course, we can't, have the entire thing up there, but it's an interesting session. I loved talking to you, Shravan. Thanks for joining us.
Likewise.
All right. So basically, let's end with an outro. How do you ensure that documentation is accessible and easy to understand for all relevant parties?
I think one of the very important things while writing documentations is how simple can you keep it? And if you're not keeping it simple, if you're making it complex, then the product will end up being complex. So this is more of a problem of discovery. How well do you understand the problem? That what is the core problem? If you understand the core problem well, generally it's a Pareto principle. Most of 20% of the use cases that you essentially write will cover 80% of consumer value. And if you just write those 20% use cases in the right manner, right, everybody will be on the same page. And it will be easy to consume. But if you make it unnecessarily complex, that I'm writing 500 use cases in a product, if the PRD is hard to read, how do you expect the product to be good?
Absolutely.
So that's how you essentially do. So you do the discovery well, you prioritize really well, you come up with those list of 20, 30 use cases, very important use cases, and make them put in a very, very simple manner for everybody to understand. So it shows your understanding. It shows the understanding across to the organization. Yeah.
Perfect. So everybody, thanks again for joining our bi-weekly session of Hubler Product Talks. So if you're someone who has an enterprise-grade challenge, we're Hubler. We help build your very first web mobile app for your use case. So we have a no-code app creation platform, which lets you develop and deploy custom business apps to suit your requirement. So Shravan, thank you for joining. I'm going to let you guys go and enjoy your Friday. You have a wonderful evening, have a wonderful weekend. And from us at Hubler, reach out to us at sales@hubler.app or hubler.com. Thank you so much. Take care.
Yeah. Bye-bye.